Seven on Sundays podcast is intended for mature audiences. Episodes discuss sensitive and fraught topics that many teens and 20-somethings face, but may be triggering. The content may not be suitable for all audience members. Please take caution when listening.
My world just comes crashing down. We are both sobbing on the phone, and I had found out that unfortunately he had been dating her for the past 3+ years, whatever. Every time he was in her dorm, they were hooking up. And when I would leave his house in the morning because he didn't want his parents to think he had a girl over, it was actually because she would show up 20 minutes later.
Hello and welcome to Seven on Sundays, the podcast about how young adults are navigating sex, relationships, and life today.
We are your hosts, Dr. Shez Leiby and Stephanie Boy, and each week we will share our candid conversations with young adults and experts about today's tough topics. Hello and welcome to Seven on Sundays. We're so glad you're joining us today. Today our guest is Riley. She is a college graduate, recent college graduate, and she's going to share with us a story of a man that she dated freshman year. And I have not met this person, but I would say that he has antisocial personality disorder, or we might call it a sociopath in the old days. And I want you guys to really listen to her full story because you see the progression of deception that this person went through. It took a while, it took a little while, but she's going to share how all these layers of deception and what happened in her story. It's pretty unbelievable in a lot of ways, but in other ways, I can tell you, I know of 3 people personally, 3 young people that have had similar experiences. The research says that people with antisocial personality disorder is like 1 to 4%, but that is way low. I think that's the numbers of people that are actually caught and diagnosed, but the actual number is a lot higher. So this is important for parents and students to be aware of. Riley talks about beige flags, which are those little gut feeling flags that you're like, that doesn't add up. And I think it's really important that we teach people to pay attention to those. And the other important thing is, please, please, please Google anybody that you're dating. When you Googled this person that she was dating, it did come up his criminal record. Clear as day, like that came up, but he had an excuse for it. He had reasons for it, whatever. But still, I think it's really important to be aware and careful.
I would say the same thing. I mean, for me, when I heard Riley's story, it wasn't like a progression as much as for me, it stood out like all of those kind of 48-hour kind of stories that I hear where there are just these fantastical stories that someone tells that just seem to always kind of override your emotional response to something so that I guess, override your natural response so that it elicited something emotional which made you then forget the bad thing that they did. And I feel like that's kind of common. I'm not the psychologist here. I have no idea whether that is, it belongs to some particular, psychological problem. But I definitely have seen this many times in my life where people will say things, to get themselves out of things, but they make it this extreme thing. I've heard it. I've seen it in people, and it to me is always a reason to put on the brakes and go, I don't know. This seems very too big, too crazy to be true. One thing, 2 things that are maybe crazy is possible to be true. But when you start to see more than 2 stories that make something so, outlandish that it overrides your natural response, it's always a warning sign to me. And the other thing I would say about Riley's story was the fact that it was almost like this idea of the Prince Charming, that we have in our heads. It's like we go into college and we're going to find this great guy. And I think we tend to put a lot of eggs in one basket instead of, like you said, do a background check. I would say always be skeptical of someone. I say this to my kids, even when it's just friends in college. You don't know them. You are meeting them and they can seem amazing for 3 months. And then the wheels start to fall off, you know? So the idea is no matter who it is, you should always hold a little bit of skepticism until you've known them a year, maybe more, you know, then you can really feel a level of comfort. You have no idea the dysfunction that people come from. You have no idea the mental issues that people might have, and they don't show up right away. They don't show up in the first season. They don't show up in the second season. After a year, you might see it. I would say for me, maybe I'm skeptical, maybe I'm cynical, but I would always hold a little bit of skepticism toward anyone that I met. And like you said, if it's do a background check, do a background check, do a little Googling. You can always see where somebody went to high school. You can always look them up. There's some sort of electronic trail of their existence, and it will give you insight to who they are. So that's what I would say. I don't know. I think this is a great story, and let's just jump right in.
Today, we are talking with Riley, who is a college graduate, recently graduated, but she hadn't experienced her freshman year that she's going to share with us. And what's interesting for me as a psychotherapist is this particular situation, moms and kids might think is really rare, but I actually hear about this more than I'd like to. We're going to talk about antisocial personality disorder, can also be known as, sometimes we say sociopathology, psychopath, we say words like that for these kind of situations. But we're going to hear Riley's story and hear how she has also transformed from that really destructive relationship, how she found out about it, how she got involved in it, and how she transformed. So thank you, Riley, for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Glad to have you. Do you want to jump in with kind of from the beginning? You're a freshman, and tell us how this all kind of started, where how you met this person and how this relationship progressed or showed up for you, and what you were like. I'm sure you were an excited kind of new freshman, ready to start this new adventure in college.
I, had just graduated high school and I was really excited about going to college and, the chance to meet new boys that actually, wanted to date, because that was kind of an issue in high school, was just this whole hookup culture and guys wanting to get experience under their belt before college and not really wanting to date. So going to college, I was really excited because I thought, oh, I could, find something that's more long term and not a guy that feels like he's just using me. So I started my courses in college and met my best friend. She lived down the hall from me in my dorm, and everything was going great, as it is. Still scary as a freshman, but everything was going pretty great. I loved meeting new people and meeting everyone in my classes and everything. At our school, you don't rush until spring. So there's this rule where you're only allowed to hook up or go out with boys that are freshmen. So no older guys until you're in a sorority. So you're kind of limited to that same freshman, boy, maybe same mentality as high school.
Is that a written rule or is that a Greek life rule?
That's a Greek life rule. And so if you want to get into a sorority, any sorority, doesn't matter which one, that's kind of like a known unspoken rule between all of them, because you could be potentially talking to a sorority girl's ex or a sorority girl's boyfriend and you don't know that, and then you are blacklisted, so it's kind of like unspoken rule that the older girls will tell the younger girls, like, do not talk to any boy that's not a freshman until you're in a sorority. So, I'm going about my life, blah blah blah, and then one day I met this kid. He was walking up towards my dorm, and I had met him through like mutual friends once, and like in like a party drinking scene, but I hadn't really like talked to him that much or really gotten to know him. And he was walking by my dorm, and I was like, oh my gosh, hi. And I don't know why, thinking back on it, I don't know why he was walking towards my dorm on some like random Saturday night. That's kind of weird because he didn't really have a destination. It looked like he was just like walking, and I happened to be out there, and he happened to know that I would be out there for some reason. And so he walks past, and I'm like, oh my gosh, hi. He comes over, and then this is kind of when we first really met. We started talking, and then I told him to come inside the dorm, and we just, I wasn't comfortable bringing him to my room, so we just talked in the common room for like 3.5, 4 hours, which was crazy because I'd never talked to this guy before. And I'd learned that he was a transfer from a different school. So then I was like, okay, I can talk to him so he's a year above. So I was a freshman, he was a sophomore. And I was like, okay, like, I guess I can talk to you, blah, blah. And we really hit it off. He's like my dream guy. We're just nonstop laughing for 4 hours. This goes from like 12 a.m. until like literally 4 a.m. We're nonstop laughing, talking about life, like getting to know each other. And in that moment, I was like, I have just met my soulmate. Like, this is incredible. The night ends, blah, blah, blah. He leaves. I go to bed. I'm all excited and giddy and tell my roommate about it the next morning. And then I guess kind of a relationship blossoms from there. But it was a relationship with no labels, really, because this girl in my class who I was like kind of friends with through class, like just my peer, he said that they were exes from high school. So I'm thinking a long time ago, because he's older. And, I was like, okay, like that's kind of awkward, blah, blah, blah. He's like, yeah, so just like don't mention anything. Like, I don't want her to feel weird about it, blah, blah, blah. So it's like, okay. But then I'm, in class kind of asking her about her boy life, all that. And she's talking about this new guy that she's like kind of seeing and dating. And so I'm like, okay, like I feel good, like not a guilty conscience, blah, blah, blah. I'm not super close with her, blah, blah, blah. This is okay. So, I start kind of talking to this kid, and we'll just call him Ben for this. But I start talking to Ben more, and we are hanging out every day. He meets my best friend, my roommate, my guy friend group that are also freshmen that lived in my dorm. He started to sleep over. He would walk me to class and then go to his classes and everything. And we would study in the library for hours together. So we got really close. And this time frame was all from about October to February. That was the whole length of our relationship, actually. But when we got really close was October through December. And we were hanging out every single day for hours on end. And I was so happy because I thought, wow, I finally met this guy who he even talked about like maybe marriage. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like a guy that sees something long term. Like I was so in love. So I thought. Then a little bit down the road, just some things weren't adding up, and I was confused. And for this formal he was supposed to go with me to, he said he was all of a sudden sick and sent a picture of his toilet, but like nothing was in it. So it was just little weird things that started to happen that I was like, huh, that's weird. And then I noticed he would hang out with his ex-girlfriend a lot. But I'm so, freshman me, naive, like I always see the best in people, that I thought, oh, they're just old best friends. And he would say that. He's like, oh, we're just like, we're friends. Like, we were in high school together, dated. So like we got close, but we're friends. Like there's nothing more. And I wanted to believe that. And I thought the best of him, and everyone did too, my best friend and my guy friends. So I was like, okay, that's fine. And so I didn't really think too much about it. Turns out, so I guess December, it's a lot. So I'm trying to kind of summarize it in a shorter
You're
story.
doing great. You're doing
Um,
great. And thank you for sharing this. And I know it's hard because when you are in love with someone, the feelings take a while to process. So even though it's been many years, 4 years or 5 years, whatever it's been, it's still, you can get there. So you're doing great. Thank you for sharing this. How did you know that he was hanging out with his ex-girlfriend? Like, did he tell you that?
he was very open and honest, which is why I trust him so much, was that he was like, "Oh, I'm hanging out with Sarah, let's call her." And I'd be like, "Okay, I trust you." And then we had each other's locations. So, and I knew just from talking to her, like what dorm she was in, blah, blah, blah. So I could see his location, and it was always at Sarah's. And I was like, that's weird. But I trusted him. I wanted to believe the best. And he would always come hang out with me more, is what I thought. So fast forward, Christmas break goes by, then it's January and Valentine's Day comes around, and I'm thinking, oh, we're gonna do something, and for some reason he's sick again. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. All of a sudden he's sick, but I see a picture, a Snapchat of where he sends by accident. I don't know. I doubt it. But it's like his shoes. And, girls, we're pretty smart. We can see where someone is. We can see the floor design and know exactly what restaurant that boy is in. And, so I knew.
Sleuthy girl.
We're so sleuthy. So I knew immediately. I was like, he is not at home. Who is he with? He is out somewhere. And, of course, I believed him, because the thing was, and most people are like, okay, Riley, how did you not see this come? Like, how did you believe everything he said? But the thing was, is he was so charismatic, so endearing, so just everyone who knew him loved him. Everyone who knew him thought, oh my gosh, he's so great. He is so charming, and he's so honest and refreshing, and just wants to be friends with all of your friends, wants to meet your family, which he did meet my family. He met my dad multiple times.
Actually, I was going to just ask you that. Did he meet your family, and what did they did they see anything weird?
Remember if he met my mom, but I know I talked about him to her all the time and would tell her things that he would say. So I think she, was pretty like aware and always had some weird suspicion, but she just wanted me to be happy and loved that I was happy. So she was just super supportive. But my dad had a lot of business here in my town. So he would come for like a quick night and take us to dinner. So he did meet Ben, and, you know, he really loved the guy. He was like, he's so nice and polite, and you can tell he really likes you.
Was Ben from the town where you were?
Yes. So Ben and his ex are from this college town. And so they went to that local high school together, blah, blah, blah. And so I would actually go to Ben's house. I never met his parents, though, which was weird to me. I would have to leave before his parents woke up. I did lose my virginity to him. So you can kind of tell how in love I was with this boy, because that really means a lot to me. And so, I saw a whole future with him.
Right.
And when you meet someone that's so Mr. Prince Charming, magical, like Bachelor, The Bachelor happens in however many weeks. This was the same type of scenario. I was like, I am so head over heels. Like, my dad likes him. My friends love him. There are these few things he does that are a little weird, but whatever. I'm so in love. Fast forward past Valentine's Day, it was my sorority's dad's weekend. So my dad was in town, and this night was kind of when everything, unfortunately, came crashing down. And what was really funny was that while I was learning everything, my dad, like, wasn't feeling well. He was, like, under the weather, but he still wanted to be there for me, so he tried to, come, but he wasn't able to come to dinner because he was, like, really sick. But I was with all these other dads and my friends' dads, and they were so supportive when I'll explain everything found out. They're like, "Let's go get him," like, all this stuff. So, basically, this was late February, like, very end of February. I'm so in love still, blah, blah, blah. My roommate calls me, and she's like, "Riley, I'm at this, like, sleepover right now with that girl, Sarah, that's in your class. And she, you know, I was just talking about you and boys and stuff. And she said that she's dating Ben." And I was like, "No, my roommate Riley's dating Ben. What are you talking about? Like, he's over at our dorm every single night. Like, he slept over, all this stuff." My roommate had called and had explained that. And I was like, "That's really weird. I'm not sure if I believe that. Can I talk to her?" And because my roommate had said they've been dating for the past like 4 years, like they're still dating. And I was like, "What?" And so I talked to her. I'm on the phone with her, and I leave this dinner that I was at with my friends and their dads. And I talked to her for about 2.5 hours. And my world just comes crashing down. We are both sobbing on the phone, and I had found out that unfortunately he had been dating her for the past 3+ years, whatever. And every time he was in her dorm, they were hooking up. And when I would leave his house in the morning because he didn't want his parents to think he had a girl over, it was actually because she would show up 20 minutes later. So I had the like nighttime shift, and then she would come in the morning. There were just so many things that I found out, but probably the biggest one, besides him, cheating on me, was the fact that he was not even a student at our school. And so she had told me that. And I guess she found out because she's the girlfriend. They had Valentine's Day together. Had like Christmas with him, was obviously close with the family. So the mom and dad, she texted them, and they were like, "He's supposed to be doing like community college classes. He's not a student at your school. I don't know what you're talking about."
So he
And
told her as well, or played the game that he
he
was a student.
yes, so he was this master manipulator, kind of had everyone, including a fraternity, which, mind you, is practically impossible. That just shows how genius he is. Everyone believed he was a student. How could you not? He wore a backpack every day. He had a laptop. He went to the library with me for 6 hours during exam season, studied back to back for 7 hours that next Saturday in the library.
He wasn't even in community college, or he was?
No, he was
No,
in nothing. He
he
was
was in
supposed to
nothing.
be in community college, but was literally living this fake life instead.
Wait, did his parents know that he wasn't in community college?
They thought he was.
Oh, so he manipulated everybody. Parents,
Everyone.
the girlfriend, everyone.
Mhm. Everyone.
Okay, can I just jump in for a second and ask Dr.
Yeah.
Shez something? Seems to me that when there are these kind of people, I don't know what the actual diagnosis is for him, but living this dual life, right? According to Riley, he's very charming, everybody loves him, but there were these red flags. It seems to me that like this is the thing is people are ignoring and I understand that it's hard when you're dating someone you're young, but I feel like those red flags, like they're so hard for other people, or I guess people want to believe what they want to believe, but I just feel like those red flags should really be warnings to us that someone is, when things don't add up, that should tell you something. I mean, I'm sure you don't think it's he's dating someone else, but I will also say, I mean, I was friends with a woman who let her husband drive across country with another woman because they were going to some music festival, and she was like, "Oh, I totally trust them." I don't ever think that that's I think that's a really hard thing for guys to be traveling and stay, like he's staying over his ex-girlfriend's apartment at.
Here's the deal. These kind of people prey on, they
Mhm.
know the naive, the friendly, open. It's no accident that he was interested in these two girls. I don't know what Sarah's like, but I imagine that she's like you, Riley, more, open and trusting. It sounded like she trusted
Exactly.
him too. So I think in order for this to work, this level of deceit, it's a pervasive pattern. This is a personality disorder that like does not change. This is medication doesn't necessarily help this unless he has other things he's dealing with too. But this is a pervasive pattern of deception, manipulation, all those kind of things that probably started really young, and the more that he can get away with it, the more it's like a high. It's like a, "Oh my god, I can do this," you know?
This happens to women who their husband left them, they're raising their kids alone, where they are really
Mhm.
in need or wanting that relationship more than wanting
Trusting.
to want, and more than wanting to look at red flags.
And if somebody is this skilled, the red flags, you have to be sleuthy. Like the red flags, this wasn't one person that he fooled. This was many people. This was, if you're saying a fraternity gave him, I remember you saying before, a social bid, that's a bunch of guys that didn't have red flags that were like, sure, we'll give this guy,
Exactly.
which is not
And
supposed to happen.
and my dad had, met him, and after that I was like, "Oh, cool, he's in the clear." And my guy best friend, him and his roommate loved him, and they were all like becoming pals, and we would go to dinners together, and it was just there were so many like good things that I guess I overlooked the red flags. But
Mhm.
what's interesting is that the red flags weren't necessarily red flags that you're thinking of for cheating. That's what a lot of women look at. They're like, okay, could he be cheating? Could he, and that's what you look at. These were red flags about lying about who he is as a person in general.
Can
So,
you describe those?
yeah. So, some of the red flags that I didn't realize were red flags were that at my university, you can go get lunch in the dining hall and you need your ID card. And everyone on campus gets an ID card. Ben had said he lost his. Typical. Every boy loses theirs. He would be like, "Oh, can we use your card to go into the dining hall? Blah, blah, blah. Like, I need, like, let's get food, but I lost it, blah, blah, blah." So, I would swipe it in easily, blah, 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 do that. And so I didn't really think much about this whole ID card at that time. Fast forward to November, December, my dorm is hosting like a cookie decorating thing, and you need your ID card, of course. And he's like, "Oh, I don't have it." And they say, "Oh, that's fine. We'll just plug in your ID number. You must have it memorized." And he very quickly goes, 1278436. I'm like, "Oh, yeah, that's believable." They type that in and they go, "That's weird. You're not in the system." And so he gives them first, last name, but he doesn't repeat the number again, probably because he forgot it. And they're like, "Everyone's in the system. That's really weird that you're not in it. Like, there must be a glitch." And he goes, "Yeah, must be a glitch. Like, that's strange." So that was probably red flag number one. Number two was he would always say any class I was in or saying, oh, I'm having a hard time when we were studying in December together before exams, he would be like, oh, I took that. That was easy. And I'm like, how did you take that? You were at a different school. You're a transfer student. And he would say, oh, it was literally the exact same.
Let's get this straight. He would sit at the library at exam time for 6 hours and pretend to be studying for an exam.
Yes, 6 hours plus. So we would sit across from each other. I don't know what he was actually doing on his laptop, but he had a backpack. He never sent me his actual schedule. He just would flash it to me on his phone. So I never knew his exact schedule. But he did show me what looked like a regular schedule. It could have been anyone's. It could have been Sarah's. It could have been one of the frat guys that he was with, you know? So he had this fake schedule. So that was red flag number 2. And there were so many more that, you know, kind of clicked after I found out.
What I have heard, there's a great podcast called Something is Wrong. And what I have noticed, and I've noticed it actually in people that I've met, and I want to know if Dr. Shez, if this is this type of personality where there's almost like fantastical stories related to the red flags. Like they always have these stories that are so much bigger in life than like the average person. Was he like that, Riley?
Oh, 100%. And that's interesting you bring that up because we actually, I don't know much about that, but a psych class I took kind of mentioned that. And he would always tell these like grandiose stories. Like, you know, he would say, oh, I'm getting this Tesla on this day, blah, blah, blah. And, oh, like I did this. And, you know, I was caught for drinking on this campus. And so, haha, I got like arrested for that once. So like, all this stuff. And so he always had these.
I feel like this is I don't know if this is part of this personality type, Dr. Shez, but I have literally heard this so many times that for me now, when people have these stories that are so much, I mean, most people might have one story that's funny or larger than life or grandiose, but these people seem to have many, many, and they can make up these, like when there's a red flag, somehow it ushers in one of these crazy grandiose stories. Is that part of it, Shez?
Definitely. Yeah. I can share the actual symptoms in a minute. I don't have them memorized. It's supposedly rare in society, but again, I have heard these kind of stories. This was a pretty big extent that he went to, that he risked, you know, for that many months not going to this school, in addition to seeing 2 girls, in addition to all these times that he could have been caught.
He had the campus gear, like the merchandise. So he would go to the school spirit store and buy my campus hoodie. And so he would wear that and every, you know, guy, it's a pretty like wealthy area that goes to this university is wearing the same outfit, the same Peter Millar pants with this, you know, hoodie and like nice on cloud shoes, whatever. And so every guy looks the same. So you wouldn't really ever second guess it. It wasn't anything that anyone would think, oh, he's not. But kind of going back to the story, I found out that so I was talking to the girlfriend and, you know, she obviously hated me, which was very tough for me because I truly thought they weren't together. But I understand I was the other woman in this situation. And so people are always, you know, when you're a victim
I'm sorry,
of that.
she hated you. You mean from October to February until the 2 of you figured out what was going on
No, she
afterward?
I get she could have probably hated me from October then, but I mean, she seemed nice to me. We were in class, like it was fine, you know. But my roommate had told me like she literally like hates you and doesn't want to talk to you after this call, which I understood. I'm like, okay, I'm the other woman. I didn't know, so it's not my fault, but I get it. Like, you know, I had this trauma from a certain amount of months and all these lies. she was saying he did this not to this extent, but that he would cheat on her in high school and lie about it and hang out with this other girl and like fall in love with her. And she's like, he lies all the time, blah, blah, blah. I knew it. So she probably has a lot more trauma from it. But yeah, so we were talking, I text him, I'm like, you're busted, like your games are over. And that's pretty much all I said. And no answer. Hadn't heard from him ever since. And we were like dating, and so I sent that text and then no reply, nothing. Side note, she was trying to figure out where he was, because then she started to worry about him being suicidal because his friend had texted her because his friend knew they were dating. And so she was trying to figure out with the parents where he was, blah, blah, blah. During that time, my roommate and my best friend were like, let's call campus police and see if they can look up a number or
Can I just say, great job on that. Great friend, great roommate. This, for
Yeah.
anybody out there, this was so important. Okay, keep going.
So we did. They come over, and I'm obviously kind of still in shock. My dad's asleep, so I haven't really called him to fill him in yet. And they come over. They're like, give us his name, all this stuff. And they're like, yeah, he's not a student. Let's run his license or his ID. And so they look it up, and I honestly, to this day, don't know how old he is. However, in that moment, they tell me he is a 27-year-old that's been arrested for credit card fraud. And I'm like, what's the story there? Blah, blah, blah. And I guess they can't tell me too much details. So my roommate somehow finds out from the girlfriend that I guess he had stolen this girl's credit card and used it. And what's funny was that in this relationship, and this was my first relationship, I didn't mention this, I paid for everything. So when we would go out, I would pay for dinner. When we would go out and get Starbucks, I would pay. When he needed gas a couple times, he'd be like, oh, like, my mom's so mad at me. Like, I have no money right now, blah, blah, blah. I would pay for a bunch of stuff. And he's like, oh, I'll just pay you back. I promise, all this stuff. I'd never had a boyfriend. So I was obviously willing to pay for things and do anything to keep this relationship going. Or, I just had never had an experience. I didn't know, oh, when you're in a relationship, you should split the bill, or the boy should pay for it one time and you offer the next time. Or, I hadn't had that experience. So I thought, oh, this is normal. Then I'm in that room and I just like fall to the ground, sobbing and bawling in my best friend's arms. And I remember the officer was like, if we see his license plate, I described his car, everything. They're like, we will arrest him the second he ever steps foot on this campus. But what's interesting is that the officer had said this isn't the first case that we've had. This isn't the first time that something like this has happened. And
With other people.
Yeah. Like, and
Yeah.
another man or woman, guy or girl, a girl being deceitful, or, they're like, this isn't the first time. After that, for the next like 3 years, sophomore, junior, senior year, we had like rigorous ID checks. And so when you go into the library, you have to swipe it. You have to, tell them your number and they look it up and confirm and see your photo ID, all of that. And so it's so funny because everyone was so annoyed by that and they didn't know why, but this is actually why.
That's a big story.
It is a big story. And Riley, thank you for sharing it with us, because I know
Yes.
it's not an easy story to tell. And I'm sure, all heartbreak still feels the same, whether you've been deceived or not. But I wanted to just say this, because obviously the goal of this show is to give advice and tools and insight to our listeners in an effort to help them, and an effort to help parents who might be out there. And some things that I'm hearing, I already mentioned, which is these fantastical stories, red flags that get ignored. The other thing that I'm hearing, and I think is interesting, and I think should be a red flag to people, and maybe it wasn't to you, we didn't even talk about it, is you didn't meet his family, you didn't meet his
Mhm.
ex-girlfriend, you never saw his ID or his schedule or things like that, like all of these kind of things that would absolutely give away more insight to who he was were something verboten for this, relationship. And I think that that is a really big red flag. If you can't meet a family member, if you can't talk to an ex-girlfriend, if there's no friend, I mean, okay, he's getting a social bid. Did he have any close friends, or were they just a social bid because people who met him, the same time you did 3 months ago, If you don't see a long-term friend, I think these are big red flags that are not obvious red flags, but like put all together, it tells a big picture that someone is not being honest about their past. Is that right, Dr. Shez?
Definitely. And also, you don't know till you know. So the beauty of this show is we're sharing that this kind of stuff can happen. Did I think this could happen, that a 27-year-old could pose as a sophomore in high school and get away with it and have all these other
Sophomore in college.
sophomore in college, all these other compounded lies? Not really. And I'm in the field, but I really didn't think that that would happen. Like, I did think student IDs, or it's kind of unbelievable to me that a kid would sit for 6 hours in a library pretending to study. Like, that would drive me crazy. But that's the pervasive and progressive nature of this illness, that if that's what it is, and I can't diagnose anybody that I haven't met with, but I mean, that's, those are the red flags. But also we have to be aware that these things happen. And again, until you know, you don't know. Now,
Right.
cheating happens all the time. So cheating is, kind of the entry level to this kind of deception stuff. The other thing is he had a record. And I do think that it's wise for anyone dating anyone, I don't care what age you are, to do a quick Google search. We have that ability, and see if something shows up.
I mean,
If
even
it
with their high school, like you can search someone's name and
Yeah.
their high school, and usually you'll come up with a picture or them on the crew team or something like that. If you find nothing like that, I would say, you know, I think maybe the message here, because again, we want to, use Riley's story as an example for young people if they're in a relationship where they haven't dug a little bit deeper. And I think that that is maybe the thing here. Like, do that quick Google search, even the classes. Like, let me see what you're studying. Tell me what you're learning about. Like, that's an easy way. Like,
Mhm.
if somebody's stumbling on what it is that they're learning, who's in your class? Like, so who was your best friend? Like, even those curiosity that dig deeper, they're not obvious, but if somebody is struggling to give you that information, I think that should be a real red flag. Look at their ID.
Problem is, like, Mr. Ted Bundy and others, they're so charismatic and good at
Mhm.
deflecting to you and wanting you to share, and people love that. Like, that's,
Yeah.
a given. So they're so masterful at that. And again, they've learned this over time of what works to keep the deception going.
I think just from my perspective, and if I had advice to give girls going through this, going to college or in high school or, whatever post grad, I think for those of us who don't have anxiety, which is rare, I'm probably one of my only friends that doesn't have anxiety. All my friends that do are the ones that are questioning, and they're being skeptical no matter what. And yeah, maybe they're not the one that's in love with that person, but I've kind of almost tried to adopt some of those habits that they have when they are going on a date with a person or when they are dating someone. And yeah, it can be unhealthy to be like, oh, he's cheating on me and constantly thinking that and trying to sleuth and figure that out. But most of the time, they're the ones that always catch something that's going on that no one else noticed or thought was going on. So my advice would be to be skeptical, and if it, within a good, you know, range, but if it's too good to be true, it probably is. And when you want something so desperately, I know this for abusive relationships as well, when you want something so desperately, you're going to believe the good. You're going to believe what they say. You're going to, give them the benefit of the doubt. And if you are someone that tends to give someone the benefit of the doubt, which I know I have like my girlfriends that always give the benefit of the doubt. If you know you're someone that does that, when it comes to a partner, significant relationship, friendship even, you and it's new and you haven't known them for however many years, you kind of secretly need to not give them the benefit of the doubt if there are multiple, even beige flags that pop up, not red flags, but beige flags that pop up and you're like, "Well, that's weird," You kind of gotta be skeptical.
Yeah.
Even
I
if
think that is awesome advice because you don't know these people. I mean, in all honesty, by the way, does this condition, Shez, does this show up more in men than women?
Yes. Yes. According to the
Okay.
research, but the problem is, but by the time they get diagnosed, they might be in jail and it's like really bad because there is criminal behavior. So I think there's a lot of undiagnosed people, whether that's males or females, but predominantly men for sure.
I know you said that these are your more anxious friends that are second guessing and all of that kind of stuff, but I feel like we don't really know people for a full year.
Yeah.
I mean, I really want to stress that in college, you feel like your roommate has your back in the first 3 months that you're going out with her. You have no idea whether a guy comes along and she's interested in him and she's going to dump you and leave you unsafely out drinking or whatever to get home until there is a reason why you have friendships that build over time or that you need a year, like 3 months. All of these kids that are going to school are learning about themselves at the same time. This person might have come from high school and had all these ideas about themselves, but they've never been in the situations that they are in right now in college. It's the first time for them too. They don't know who they are until they've been under certain circumstances. So I think that's the same for guys. It's no different. If a guy goes to school, let's just say there's a guy who's not very popular. We're talking not these whatever this type of disorder is, but he's been unpopular in high school. Like we all know that there are people who have a glow up, they go to college, they glow up. They were a great guy in high school because they never dated anyone. They never had multiple
Mhm.
opportunities. Now they're in college and there's 3 girls that like them. You don't know who you are until you're put in a situation. So for people to just assume that the person that they're with is going to be good, I have to say I'm on the side of the girls who are a little bit more anxious. Like you just don't know until you know.
Yeah.
Right, and I think that's also why, like, I hate to bash The Bachelor, but that's why not a single bachelorette relationship works out is because they're with each other for 9 weeks.
Yes.
Only 9 weeks, that's the duration of the show, and none of the relationships
No.
last, unless obviously maybe they're both just easy, compatible, great people, but that's very rare. Very
Yes.
So true. And the social media and shows like that make us think that, oh, you can find your true love, in those 9 weeks or whatever it is. And that very rarely happens. There are percentages. I wrote about this for a Psychology Today article about The Bachelorette because there was a psychology major that became The Bachelorette. And I'm like, you know the statistics. Are you seriously trying this? And she did. And it still remains to be seen whether her relationship lasts. But you're right about that. Okay, 2 questions, Riley. How did you work through this? And we don't have a lot of time, but I want to know your advice for getting through this, because it was your first really significant relationship and you loved this person and he did play the charismatic everybody loves me game. And then not only did you find out cheating, not only did this end abruptly, but you also found out that you've been master manipulated. And that's a severe violation to the psyche. That is like, and you lost your virginity to him, like all these trust barometers were so broken. So I'd love to know, how you worked through that. And also, where is he today? Like, what do you know about, is he continuing this? Did he get arrested? All those things.
This was my freshman year, which was right when COVID started happening. And I found out late February. And that March was when the news came out about COVID. So every student had to go home. And that, as much as it sucked for the world and everyone, that was kind of a blessing in disguise, because that forced me to quite literally go no contact, no nothing with him. Besides being a very trusting person, which is an issue that I'm like working on, it's kind of a flaw because I can be too trusting, even to this day, which is shocking because I was so my trust was lost and I was so violated. But I'm still a very trusting person. I just am now more cautious. But along with being a trusting person is being very forgiving. And so if I had stayed in the town, I think I would have probably reconnected or forgiven him, because when you're that smart and master manipulative, you're also really good at apologizing and blaming it on something else, or saying, and getting that person to feel bad for you. So kind of went home and then didn't talk to him for a long time. And that was really tough. I'll admit, like I was home, I was crying, but I had my family and they were a huge support system. So having that support system through any breakup is really crucial. My parents were like, don't contact him again, blah, blah, blah. But obviously, I'm someone that needs closure. I don't believe in that now. I don't think anyone needs closure. It's a false thing that we all think we need, but you don't. But in that moment, I thought I did. Because closure can happen for yourself. You don't need the other person to be involved to get closure. But in that moment, I thought, oh, I needed him. So I reached out probably around summer, June or July. And I was just so confused why this had happened to me and why he did this to me. Because I gave him my world. Like, I was like his number one fan, and I was just so confused why that happened. So I messaged him and I was just like, can you just tell me why? Why did you do this to me? Like, can you just tell me why you did this? And that's all I said. And sure enough, he immediately answers. He said, Riley, like, I'm so sorry. I was going through the darkest point in my life where I saw no other option besides creating a fake life other than dying. And he was like, I was ready to end my life every day. And he was like, the only thing I could do to prevent that was creating this false narrative and false life. I'm a psych major, and so obviously that pulls at my heartstrings, and I understand that behind this, it's a mental disease, just like Munchausen by proxy, all of that. These are horrible things that horrible people do to people that don't deserve it. But most of the time, it's because they have a mental illness or something is going on. Like, I think it's very important to see how mentally stable someone is before you decide to go into a relationship with them. Because this isn't knocking mental health or anything. Like, I have my own issues, of course, but with the partner that I have, I pick a partner that doesn't have any mental issues. If it's depression, I understand that. Been there, done that, had that, But if it's like a serious disorder or, something that could cause them to do something that would harm you, but you don't really think it would. I think that's something I now focus on and think about a lot because it's just really sad. So after that, I, said, well, thank you for telling me that. That means a lot. And of course, who knows if that was his way to slither back in. He was like, I'd love to get lunch with you when you come back in town and explain everything. Little young me, I was tempted, but my parents were like, I'm very honest with them. So they knew everything. I was like, I got to admit, I texted him or whatever. And they were like, do not get lunch with him. Like, he's just going to try to pull you back in. And when you're so in love, you really want to. So I did want to, but honestly, COVID was a blessing and I couldn't go back for a long time. So kind of forgot about that, got over it just by having that distance, I think. No contact, no nothing. I think that's the best way to get over someone. So that's pretty much it. Where he is now, I don't know. Cannot say. I have no interest. Yeah, that's kind of how that all came to an end.
Even I was going through the darkest time, I was suicidal. It's so big. It's not, there's no ownership really. It's just a big story about why I had to, like, to me, that is a red flag again. I mean, and I think that people should hear that because that is such emotional manipulation to tell someone I was going to kill myself, all this kind of stuff. Like, that's okay, great. But you need to own your shit of what you did. And it doesn't sound to me, and maybe I just didn't get that part of the story, but it sounds to me more like he made a big story again about what he was going through and doesn't sound like there was a lot of ownership and it was,
Right.
it's emotionally manipulating.
Right.
And with this particular disorder, there's a lack of empathy. So that's a big red flag. Somebody that doesn't have empathy for others, he didn't ask you, I imagine, I don't know, but he didn't ask you, how are you doing? Or, I know that must have been hurtful and hard for you, or anything empathic in any way. And that's part of this particular mental disorder, that there is no empathy. There's no capacity for empathy. And I bet if you looked back while you were in relationship, these are the kind of people, I hate to say this because we all do it, but laugh at other people's misfortune versus have any little inkling of like, oh my gosh, that poor person. There isn't this empathy or ability to do that. It's blame. It's, all these other things that they can do. And it is an illness. So I like that you studied psychology and you're trying to understand these things. And again, until you know, but that is a big red flag. So you're absolutely right, Steph.
And the other thing is, for the girls who are the anxious girls who are constantly looking, maybe throw out a story that requires empathy on the part of the listener and see what you get. Just to
Good idea.
test the empathy meter on this person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or find something where he is clearly, the person that they're dating is clear, he or she is clearly in the wrong, and be very aware, hyper aware of how they respond and take ownership of what they've done, because these will tell you and give you insight to who this person is.
Absolutely.
And the last thing I'll say is that everyone thinks that it won't happen to them until it does, whether that's a car accident, assault, anything. You always hear it in stories, or I would hear things like this in my psych class, but I didn't apply it or think about it because you never think that it's going to happen to you. But it so easily can.
Absolutely. I can see myself in you and in this story. And I think you are very much like many, many girls that I speak to in college. I haven't heard this story, this kind of story, this extreme, except for on Something Was Wrong. But I really do appreciate you helping us to walk through your mindset and all of the kind of things that you've realized since then, because I think this will be a very helpful episode for people. If nothing else, find out how empathetic your partner is. Like, what's the worst that can come out is like you find out something about them. So whatever, dig in a little bit. And if your partner has a problem with that, you can always just be like, listen, dude, I don't know. I don't know you that well. It takes years to get to know people sometimes. And to me, this is important. And if they have a problem with that, that right there is a red flag.
Yeah.
Right.
And meet the mom, meet the people. Like, yeah, definitely. I want to say, Riley, I think that you are such a strong person just for sharing this in the way that you did with such, depth and consideration and forethought. The whole thing of how you explained it really will help people, because I would not have believed that this could happen at, a school in a nice neighborhood with a kid that's from a nice family, supposedly, that whole thing. You just really shared that in such a heartfelt way with the insight of where you were. And that's going to help people, because when we are desperate, we do kind of desperate things and we ignore things. And so thank you so much for your insight and strength. You're an amazing person. And I'm so happy to hear that you're in a healthy relationship today. Yay.
Yes. Thank you so much. This is reminding me a little bit of the movie Saltburn. Did you guys see Saltburn?
And You, the show You was like one of my favorite shows, but it's same thing. Charmer. Now he was a serial killer, but thank God, I do know somebody that was murdered by a serial killer at that age. And so it's not out of the realm. It's not just in movies. So we do have to, and I was in Gainesville when the Gainesville murders happened and all those things. So you do, not to scare anybody, but you do want to be alert and vigilant and aware.
Well, thank you so much for having me and listening to my story. I hope this can help other people.
Thank you so much. This was amazing.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of 7 on Sundays.
The 7 on Sundays podcast represents the opinions of Dr. Shez Levy and Stephanie Boy based on our experience. It also shares the stories, behaviors, and opinions of our guest that we do not necessarily condone or view as healthy. 7 on Sundays is an open forum to discuss what is happening with our listening audience. Some names and details of our guest stories have been changed to protect their anonymity. This podcast is not a substitute for mental health treatment. If you are in crisis and in need of mental health support, please call 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. It is free and confidential.
Join the conversation and connect with us through our website, 7onsundays.com. That's the number 7onsundays.com. We encourage everyone to do their own research. Thank you and be well.